Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Carol Tilley, and I am a faculty member in the School of Information Sciences at University of Illinois. And I do a lot of work around comics readers and the history of comics readership in the 20th century. And my chapter in this book takes a look at young Black comics readers from the period of the 30s through the 60s. And one of the things I tried to do was to share some stories largely based around photographs that sort of shed a little bit of light, I think, on what the experience of being a Black youth was in terms of reading comic books and comic strips during this time period. I've been sort of studying what it meant to be a comics reader during this period when comics were like the most popular medium around. I've been studying that for maybe 12, 13 years now. And I often, give statistics or examples that say things like 90 or 95% of kids during this time period were comics readers. Um, and that it didn't really matter whether you were a boy or a girl or Black or white or brown, that if you were a kid during these years, you were likely to be a comics reader. Uh, but to be honest, I didn't really ever give a lot of thought to the impact of race and ethnicity, both on readership. I mean, I think as a white woman, it's easy to center whiteness in my own work. And a few years ago, I was hosting the inaugural Comic Studies Society conference here at University of Illinois. And we had a community day that was free and open for folks to come experience the event. And one of the people who showed up for the community day was an older Black woman. And she, spent the whole day at the event. And she found me later on and she said, "Would it be okay if I came back tomorrow? There's a talk about um, Black women in comics that I would really love to see." And I said, "Of course." And I said, "You're my guest, so please come back and you're welcome to attend as much as you want." And I saw her again after that panel, and we had a short conversation. And she said, I was so excited to learn more about Jackie Orms and hear about these comics that were available. She said, "I grew up reading Archie, and I would have so much have loved knowing that there were comics with characters who looked like me." And I think for me, that was just a reminder that um, everyone's experiences are not my experiences. Everyone's experiences are not those of white kids. And this chapter really gave me an opportunity to look more deeply and broadly to see what I could learn about what it meant to be a young Black comics reader.
So I'm going to show a couple of the photos that you take a look at more closely in the chapter. Um, what can you tell us? Certainly, people have to read the entire chapter to hear the full analysis, but could you say a bit more about why you may have selected some of these
Sure.
photos or what interested you in terms of what they can tell us about this period?
Sure. This first photo was taken by Gordon Parks when he was working for the Farm Security Administration as a photographer, kind of documenting poverty and uh, folks who were living in more destitute situations. And at this period, he was assigned to Washington, D.C. And he took a large number of photographs of uh, the southern neighborhoods of Washington, D.C. that had a large Black concentration. There are some amazing photographs there. Uh, that I really think he was able to capture because he was a Black man photographing Black families. I don't think that his photos would have been as revealing if he were white. So I think he had some access that others didn't. But I love this photo of these two boys that he took, and I think I figured out it was around November, and they're sitting in what is the wharf area of Washington, D.C., reading a comic book. And there's not a lot of extra documentation about who these kids are. I have no idea their identities beyond the fact, what you can come to understand from looking at the photograph. Can figure out a little bit about what they're reading because you're able to identify the comic. But there's just something here that I think is really important for us to grapple with, which is, uh, you know, how did comics fit in the lives of these two boys? Was this something that the kind of thing that they read often? Did they get this from the scrap collector who appears a couple of images earlier in Gordon Parks' camera roll for that day? Um, you know, what did they think about the stories that they were reading? Because in particular, one of the stories that you can identify here is set in Washington, D.C., and has these really interesting callbacks to both the broader global current events of the time, as well as sort of what living in Washington, D.C., including in an area that was very much an area of high poverty, what that looked like. And for me, we often, when we talk about comics at a scholarly or critical level, we're often talking about uh, the texts, who the characters are, what's happening in the stories. We're talking about the production, about how they're created, and who those creators are, or the companies that produce them. And we're often talking about distribution. So we're talking about these three broad categories, but here we have a chance to see what it looks like when those comics land in the hands of readers. And that's something we know less about. And we might be able to say, there were 300,000 copies of this particular comics issue sold. But we don't ask often enough, I think, what did readers do with this? How did it fit in their lives? What new meanings did they create for themselves? Was this a means of escape, a means of verification of some kind? What new experiences did reading this comic, encountering it, provide for them? So the quality of this reproduction is not so great. And you can tell that it's a bed, and you can tell that there are piles of magazines of some kind on this bed. But this photograph was taken a couple of weeks after Emmett Till was kidnapped and murdered. And it appeared in the Chicago Defender. And just to make sure that the caption's legible, it says still unmade and unslept in since August 28th is the bed Emmett Lewis Till was taken from that night. Only one member of the Wright family has slept in the house since that night. Several comic books and papers remain on the bed. And that caption, we don't know what comic books, we can't tell from this grainy image. I haven't seen the original print yet. But for me, this image just really drove home how much of a kid Emmett Till is. I mean, I think that's something that I've known as long as I've known Emmett Till's story, but there's something so especially humanizing in this particular image for me, um, to see that, he and his cousin were just hanging out reading comic books. Um, and that was the moment when everything changed for Emmett and his family.
Mhm.
Uh, and I found a piece in another article about um, Emmett Till, and it's where the title for my chapter comes, Never Any Dirty Ones. And it's a neighbor of his in Chicago reflecting on the fact that, yes, Emmett Till was a comics reader, but he liked things like Little Lulu. And she said he never read any dirty ones. And there's, again, just something so much about the rhetoric of comics at that time,
Right.
um, the dangers that they posed. So many, especially white families, were worried in that era about the impact of reading comics on their kids' growing experiences. Um, and we have here a young Black man who was savagely murdered, and yet his neighbor is still trying to demonstrate his innocence, through ensuring that we understand he was only reading comics that were acceptable ones. Um, and with any of the stories that I shared in this chapter, I was only really able to sort of address some really superficial kinds of issues. There's so many more questions um, that I would love to try to answer. But this image is for me profoundly moving, and it's one I don't think will ever leave my head.